Okay, let's get started, everyone. So first and foremost, thank you to everyone for joining the final session of the Criteo virtual series, Holiday Planning for an Exceptional 2020. We have the honor today of working with PlaceIQ for today's final session titled How Location Data Can Help Marketers Optimize for an Exceptional Holiday Season. My name is Tim Rogers. I'm the SVP of Global Strategic Initiatives at Criteo with a significant focus on our omnichannel and CRM product development and work streams. With me today, I have Drew Breunig from PlaceIQ. Drew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Breunig. Thanks for joining us today. I'm EVP of Strategy here at PlaceIQ, and I lead our data science and analytics teams and have been swimming in data related to foot traffic patterns and how it's changing due to changing consumer behavior due to COVID-19 and social distancing efforts.
Awesome. Well, before we dive in, let's take a quick look at that poll. We asked everyone on the line, how comfortable are you shopping in stores again? And it looks like some of you are very comfortable. Some of you, the majority of you are somewhat comfortable, and yet others still are uncomfortable going into stores, which kind of mirrors what I think we've seen industry-wide, but also, mirrors the populace, right? Some people are very comfortable and/or very comfortable with the safety standards developed by retailers and that they are following. Others, it's a case-by-case basis. Do I feel good about the process that this organization has operated with? And some, continue to focus on their digital and e-commerce focus and really want to avoid interaction with folks as much as possible. So makes a lot of sense. So I guess a couple of housekeeping items to cover before we move on to the content. Please make sure to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We'll be answering them throughout and/or at the end of the conversation. So we'll be monitoring those in real time. We'll also, as part of the GoToWebinar panel, you will be able to download a couple of one-sheets and resources along with the slides that we're covering in today's presentation. But this session is being recorded, and we will follow up with both the recording of the slides and the slides in the next couple of days. And last but not least, we're going to be hosting a virtual raffle in which we're going to be given $100 in seamless gift cards, probably for that last group of people who don't want much interaction with human beings, but a $100 gift card for via Seamless. So please stay tuned until the end of the session to see who's the winner. So, all right, let's dive into today's topic. If you've tuned into any of the sessions as part of the series, you've probably become well aware that our mission is to support advertisers this holiday season and prepare for an unpredictable, unique holiday season. Because of the pandemic and the lockdown, shopping behaviors during the busiest holiday season are going to look a little bit different than in years past. As part of this session, we're going to dive into the great wealth of physical world data from PlaceIQ and online and offline data sourced from Criteo. The goal here is to, one, evaluate and learn from the COVID-19 impact of both online and brick and mortar retailers and other establishments for that matter, but also to see what trends we can use to predict the holiday plans and how consumers are going to act. And then finally, we have a set of recommendations for you so that you can be prepared after this session to get started with your holiday 2020 plans. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Drew to kick us off with a bunch of really cool data. Here you go, Drew.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. So we at PlaceIQ have a unique view of the American consumer based on our platform that processes location data from mobile devices, determines what it means, identifies visits, residences, and more. It enables us to see how these patterns shift from day to day, region to region, throughout the country. And it has been quite a vantage point from which to observe changing consumer behavior over this entire last 6 months. So to start, let's just kind of take the macro view. It's going to be a little bit busy at first, but bear with me and we'll walk through it. Take the macro view to kind of see what our story has been so far. So what we're looking at here, I'll walk you through this real quick, is we're looking at foot traffic trends, and they're indexed against 2019. So we've got this nice dash line down the middle. This dash line is the 2019 norms. So if you're above this lines, it means that your traffic on the fourth Monday of 2020 is above the fourth Monday of 2019 for your category. And we've got a whole host of categories on here. We've got auto dealerships, fast food restaurants, big box retail, malls, offices, entertainment venues, gas stations. And I'll be calling out some of these trends as we walk through. So let's walk through first kind of the phases that we've been through so far. The first phase that we went through was the panic and prepare phase. Ahead of, in early March, kind of the United States was kind of a collective ball of anxiety. One that was kind of being waiting to be set off, and it was set off by two cultural cues that both occurred on March 10th, the evening of March 10th. On March 10th, the NBA decided to suspend its season due to COVID cases among its players, and we learned that Tom and Rita Hanks were recuperating in an Australian hospital from COVID. This was the match that we needed to kind of, kick off everything. And two things happened immediately starting on March 11th. The first is that any retailers that would be associated with preparations for people to just stay inside for a while spiked straight up. So we see this up and down right here. This up and down happened for grocery stores, it happened to dollar stores, it happened to big box stores, and it happened to pharmacies. And it had a little slight bump for home improvement too, again, going to get supplies. Everything else went and found its new lows. And what you're looking at here is also a 7-day moving average just to take out some of the spikes. Traffic shot straight down to some of the lowest observed trends that we've seen at Place IQs. For 10 days, the entire normal weekly rhythm was completely gone from American life. This was a very big disruption. And it took 10 days. And what's interesting is that everyone, we kind of acted as a nation. We went out, got everything prepared, and then went home. And we went home before any shelter-in-place orders were issued. The first shelter-in-place orders were issued in California right around March 22nd. And this phase ended in March 23rd. And so what I'm kind of showing here is that the human behavior, at least amongst people in the United States, tends to lead kind of these government edicts. People are very informed about this in ways that you might not expect if you're just watching the news. From the panic and prepare phase, we entered the quarantine routine, which lasted for 3 weeks. This phase was marked by basically flat traffic. As you can see, traffic was basically the lowest levels that had been hit were locked in. People tried to stay home as much as possible. Aside from a few blips in home improvement, as people, had to go out to fix things or whatever, traffic was all negative across all verticals, though some more than others. As you can see way down at the bottom, entertainment venues suffered the most as their live shows packed with lots of people basically were reduced to nil. We also saw things like malls drop quite precipitously, as well as airports and hotels. After 3 weeks, Easter arrived, and Easter functioned in a way that we've seen kind of a pattern going through, which is holidays kind of function as turning points during this period, as opportunities for us to do something special. And what that does is it forces us to reconsider the behavior that we were having before. So when Easter hit, we saw a very shortened holiday shopping season for Easter. People ran out to figure out, oh, I only have a couple days to go find a ham or whatever. We saw traffic to fast casual restaurants like Boston Market spike up. And as people started to go out, they started to realize, hey, there are still things still open. I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to go out and start to test things. So we started to see some trends in this reemergence ramp. The first things that gained were the things that were still open. So we see this amazing gain right here, which is all home improvement centers like Home Depot and Lowe's. With less time or more money, less money and more time and people confined to their homes, they decided to make the best of the situation and embark on quarantine projects. And we saw record traffic to these venues as people went to get things to kind of improve their lives at home. We also saw a spike in visitation to fast food restaurants, which had been open the whole time, but it started to climb back up as people grew tired of cooking at home. And fast food is going to be kind of the standard bearer for what I would call the most resilient businesses during this period. The third thing we saw is that we saw significant gains to nature and outdoors venue as people had to go out to exercise after doing nothing for 3 weeks. So we see behavior adapting among these big things, and we see some things growing slowly, some things growing fast as they start to click back open. But this goes on for 2 months. However, this period kind of taps the brakes once we started to see increased case counts throughout the Southwest and West in California and Florida and Arizona, and we entered the summer slump. The summer slump looked a lot like the quarantine routine, but just with 3 months of additional knowledge. Traffic again was flat, but it was a lot more spread out. As you can see, this height here is much bigger than this tight compact right here. Some categories had transitioned from being hit very hard to now being near normal levels of traffic, just not growing. So fast food is a good example of that. We were in the summer slump basically until a little before Labor Day, and we started to see some things starting to tick back up. But in general, we haven't seen the significant breakout that we've seen associated with the reemergence ramp. So we hesitate to call a new phase quite yet. You do see some spikes towards the end over here. And this is a little bit of an artifact based on the benchmark we're using. Again, we're comparing the same day versus the past year. And one of the tricks here that is causing some of these spikes over here is that Labor Day fell a week later than it did last year. So we're comparing Labor Day weekend to a non-holiday weekend the weekend before. So in general, though, traffic is pretty flat in this period. So one of the things to kind of pay attention as we look through this is that you start to look for patterns. And there's a couple clear patterns we see, and I think this is the way to make sense of this chart and kind of keep it in your head and use it as we go forward, is that there's basically 3 groups here, if you squint. There's the groups of things that basically remain flat traffic-wise, regardless of what is going on in the world. So entertainment venues, big shows are not happening regardless of, if you have local case counts down. It's just something that people aren't itching to do. Same goes for office buildings, which are just not opening. They're slowly opening, but it's so slow. Same with airports. Airports are seeing increased travel, but it's basically, if they had, only 50 people come in there last month, now they're having 100 people. It's starting to pick up, but it's not that big. On the complete other hand, you have this group of businesses at the top that's relatively stable near their kind of 2019 norms. These are businesses like grocery stores, pharmacies, fast food, where they figured out how to conduct business during this COVID era, and people are generally comfortable going there. The big issue, though, is these guys in the middle that tend to go up when the times are good and go down when the times are bad. This is the area we call these are businesses that either can't adapt to social distancing efforts, so it's hard to kind of make adjustments in a mall. You have a lot of architecture there that you have to do, or another good example is bars and nightlife. They're basically just at the mercy of what's going on around them. And so you start to see these natural patterns shake out. And we group, let's erase these lines, we group these categories into these 3 groups. The still empty categories like airports, offices, public transit, entertainment. The vacillating categories like shopping malls, nightlife, hotels, and casual dining. And the resilient grocery stores, big box, coffee shops, fast food, dealerships, and fast casual. Now, these are really helpful to plan with, I find, because what it allows you to do is to do scenario planning. If we do start to see the virus go up in some of the areas in the middle of the United States, what's going to happen? Well, we know that these resilient businesses are going to stay pretty resilient. Why do we know that? It's because we've seen them stay resilient during outbreaks before. But the vacillating businesses like shopping malls or bars or hotels are going to be more susceptible to these things. So we should plan appropriately depending on what category you're in, or plan appropriately to take advantage of the fact that other categories are going to be hit harder. because even if you don't think you're concerned with these still empty things, they shape the patterns of traffic that come in. Now, one of the interesting things about these categories is that you're not locked into these categories. One of my favorite things to watch is that there's been a few categories who have managed to migrate from the vacillating category into the resilient category. A good example of that is fast casual dining, places like Five Guys or Panera or Chipotle. They previously were hit hard, and because there was a pretty good dine-in component to their businesses, they found themselves in the vacillating category. But they've made changes and adjustments to their business that have strongly put them in the resilient category, so that when the summer slump emerged, casual dining went down, but fast casual was able to maintain the gains that they had stuck with. So what makes someone resilient? How can you get to this kind of the good zone over here? Well, there's three things that we see common to every success story that we see in across this period. And those three qualities are this: you need to be cheaper, closer, and safer than your competitors and your alternatives. So let's talk about being cheaper. You don't have to be dirt cheap. You just need to be allow for options that allow people to trade down or make more value-based decisions. Consumers are trading down for more affordable options. Even if they're not directly financially impacted yet, a recession mindset definitely have settled in. We see that with purchases, and we also see that with the increasing savings rates. With being closer, one of the things that's important to recognize is that without their usual commutes pulling them away from their kind of home area, most people are sticking close to home. Prior to COVID, on a work day, we would see people traveling 8 to 15 miles on average away from their home to shop, work, and recreate. During COVID, we see that number drop precipitously, down to 0 to 3 miles effectively during the height of quarantine, to only 2 to 5 miles during this period. Even occasions that would drive you very far from home, like vacations, have been converted into closer alternatives. So road trip destinations or vacations are the new norm, and we see that very clearly in our data. So being closer helps out a lot. And the third thing is being safe. I can't underscore this enough. This is the most important of these three things. If you just watch the news these days, because of the way, kind of news narratives are structured, you've kind of got, some people say this, some people say that. They want to show both sides of the story. And so if you watch that, you can kind of walk away thinking, 50% of the population worries about safety and 50% doesn't. We don't see that in our foot traffic figures. We don't see that in our surveys. We see, 80 to 90% are concerned about it. It's kind of the poll we were taking before. Look, people are going out, but they just want to see a few boxes checked. And even if they aren't super concerned, if there's a venue that has those boxes checked and there's a venue that doesn't, or they're unsure if those boxes have been checked, they'll choose the venue that have those boxes checked. So low touch or outdoor venues are just more resilient than others. It's kind of that table stakes that people just check for. Consumers are willing to venture out, but they care about conditions. And we'll talk about this a little more, how it manifests as one of the most important factors in the dining economy, but we'll also talk about how it applies to retail. Now, one of the things I want to talk about here that is a new challenge for you guys as well is this be close thing. So the numbers I showed you in the previous chart are national numbers, and it's helpful to kind of get the macro trends at the national numbers. But with this be close in place, with people staying much closer to their home, you kind of get this interesting dynamic, which is previously, we would see, if someone was doing well in the US, they would be doing well everywhere. But because everybody's staying close to home, you're creating these very small micro economies. And what it means is that traffic patterns vary significantly from region to region. What you're looking at here is a heat map of traffic 2020 versus 2019 for McDonald's. And McDonald's is one of the, kind of stalwarts of the kind of flag bearer category of fast food. They're doing very well. Their traffic is basically flat 2020. But if you look at the individual counties, if a county is colored red, it means that it's down from 2019. If it's colored green, it means it's up from 2019. So you can have counties that you just cross the county line and completely the mood changes or the business context changes as well. Further, you don't have the shortcut available of just being able to pick out states. There's incredible variety even within the states themselves. Now, why do we see this regional variation? Part of it is infection rates. One of the, by design, when people stay closer to home, they tend to spread the disease less, which means that infection rates are isolated, which helps flattens the curve. The spread is slowed. That's great, but it also means you have some weird traffic patterns. The second reason we see is demographic reasons. If a county is wealthier, it's more likely to be staying home more often and ordering online. If a county is older, they're more likely to be staying at home because their risk factor is higher. We see that in our data. Third thing is we also have rural and urban impacts. So if you're in a rural community, you're more likely to travel to a next county to get the things or supplies you need. And then finally, you do have social mores that start to pull into place. We saw those very clearly when comparing the resurgence in Florida and Arizona. Arizona did a great job of shutting down foot traffic when it had a huge spike in cases. Florida did not as much. And partially this is due to demographics, but the demographics in both states are actually pretty similar. So it does show that there is something else in play. This means that there is an incredible complexity in how you target, and that some messages will play well in some counties and some will not others. You have to take into account how reemergent that county is. Now, to drill back into that safety thing, one of the things that I think is so important is the safety thing. And we actually just recently surveyed a few thousand people to ask them what were their driving kind of concerns when going out for even just pickup dining. And one of the things that we were shocked to see is that COVID safety measures was the most important factor in choosing where to eat for 31% of people. Only taste, which is 36%, so not that much higher, was a more dominant factor. Distance from home, price, service, all paled in comparison to these two key issues. Restaurants in this period need to rightfully consider safety as table stakes, just like quality of food would be. But one of the things that also is interesting here is that 25 to 30%, depending on the region, were purely just sitting out. They just weren't dining out. It's not even just dining out. They weren't even ordering takeout in. And one of the reasons is safety. So we see that also in retail as well, which is that people are ordering online, or people are making as few trips as possible because they do see that factor playing forward. So safety is kind of table stakes for most people in a surprising way. And then there are some people that it impacts even more. So it's not enough to make these changes. You kind of need to market to these changes, because again, in the same way you would talk about how great your food tastes, you also want to talk about and check those boxes so people don't have to ask them. Talk about social distancing measures, mask requirements at all. And to see kind of this this cheap, close, and safe playing out in retail, one of my favorite stories to look at is the resiliency and recovery of dollar stores in America through all of this. So if you take a look at this orange line is traffic to dollar stores year over year. Now, comparing this all to other retail categories. And what I find interesting is that dollar stores have actually managed to cross grocery stores during the reemergence ramp, and have just kind of been exchanging pole position and have been up year over year quite significantly. They actually haven't dipped negative, with the exception of just a day or two in the beginning of July, all the way since May. They've been incredibly resilient, even more so than grocery. Now, what are the reasons for this? How did they check these boxes? Well, we can see it in the data in terms of distance traveled, but we can also see it you can see this validated in the financial statements from these companies. Well, let's go through them. First, they already have cheap checked off. They're a dollar store. That's their core value proposition. But the big magic for dollar stores has been this be close narrative. So one thing that Dollar General and Family Dollar and other dollar stores have been focusing on is they've done incredible expansion over 2018 and 2019 to build out retailers in communities where people would have to drive, say, 30 minutes to get to the nearest Walmart. So they've built out in these rural communities and have become the default store. They have identified this as a clear reason that they are winning during the COVID era, and we can see that in distance travel. People are driving less to retailers, and so they are opting for dollar stores as well. The other big thing you guys need to be aware of for holiday season, not just in terms of closeness, is trip consolidation. Dollar stores are benefiting from the fact that people are consolidating trips. This has to do with closeness and it has to do with safety. We've seen surveys and we've seen evidence in the foot traffic that people would rather take, say, a trip to Costco that takes them a little bit more trouble than make a trip to a grocery store and 3 other venues. So we're seeing that trip consolidation, and we can see that trip consolidation even playing out in the dollar store category in general. Here we're looking at 2 different dollar stores. We're looking at Dollar General, which is the red line, and Dollar Tree, which is the blue line. And this is their raw visits, and we are going to benchmark them versus this dotted line, which is their average traffic before COVID. One of the things I like to point out here is Dollar Tree's doing pretty good, all things considered. They're basically back in line with their average pre-COVID traffic. You can see them hovering around that dash. But take a look at Dollar General. It created a bunch of daylight between them and their average and have been increased by basically, 15 to 20% over what their pre-COVID norm. Now, the reason for this is not only a great build-out strategy, or rather a fortuitous build-out strategy into rural communities, but also they picked 2020 as the year that they were going to diversify into grocery as well. By providing fresh grocery, which Dollar Tree did not focus on, they've enabled people to consolidate trips, take one less fewer trip, and basically go to dollar store for their dry goods pickup as well as their grocery. And this has been hugely beneficial. Finally, the last chart I'm going to show you today is showing you, hey, as I said, be cheap, be close, be safe, and how even though that is a rule that we see apply across all success stories, we can see that there's a mix of tolerances. As we saw in the survey at the beginning, hey, some people are fine just popping down to the stores, some people try to reduce it. We see that playing out here. Best Buy is a really interesting case study, and here what we're looking at for Best Buy is the duration of their trips and the percentage of their trips. So the way to read this is this yellow line is 15 to 30-minute trips. And during pre-COVID times, 25% of trips to Best Buy were 15 to 30 minutes. Once Panic and Prepare and quarantine routine hit, we saw 2 things happen. We saw really short trips, these 2 to 10-minute trips, spike up and hold for a long period. These are the click and collect trips. These are people who order online, pick up in store. These spiked up hugely in terms of share. The other trips that spiked up are these 60+ minutes. And they spiked up right here during the beginning of the quarantine routine. And that is actually employees. This is basically employee traffic. And there's just so few people were visiting Best Buy that it ended up making up a large share of their traffic. Now, what's interesting about Best Buy is that they decided to slowly open their stores. They had an online reservation system. You could go on to bestbuy.com and reserve a period where you could go in and walk around the store, and they capped off how many people were there, and you would arrive at a specific time. This helped them compete with Home Depot and Lowe's and others for appliance repair, and you can see this ticking up. So this 15 to 30 minute is people adopting this service as it goes up. But what I want to point out is that their stores reopened for normal business June 15th. And with that, visits just switched back on and up. However, even though they switched back on and up, these short visits still are higher than they were pre-COVID. This shows you that people are willing to shop, but some people still want to do click and collect. And we are seeing a different assortment in the duration of visits as we come out into normality. So visits are coming up, but they are different than they were before, and they are more diverse based on the different tolerances that people are willing to accept. So with that, I want to hand it back to Tim and let him walk you through some more of the story.
Awesome, Drew. Tons of really cool insights and data points there, really insightful. I guess for me, a couple of things that I take away there is be cheap, close, and safe, and this is absolutely part of the reason for the big box retailer's strength here, as we've seen in the public markets and as we've probably all experienced ourselves. And then second, which is really insightful, is how informed consumers are with the Best Buy example that you just shared. That, hey, when stores are open, they're ready, willing, and those that are ready, willing, and able are going to go take advantage of that opportunity. So really interesting stuff there. Thank you. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit here. And as we make the shift from consumer habits, interactions, activities, et cetera, we're going to get a little bit more into consumers' purchase behavior now. So this is a broad data point here that is coming from us from our friends at NPR. But overall, consumers are fairly back to normal now from their pre-COVID buying and spending habits. So as you see here in the chart, there was a significant decline, as Drew referenced and as we've all experienced here in the April timeframe. But now as we get back into a little bit of a better circumstance within the country, July is back to normal and continuing the ascent there in retail sales spend that we've seen essentially present throughout the decade. So as June is, again, the first month since the start of the pandemic where shoppers spent more than before, this creates a promising sign that the holiday season will be healthy regardless of which channel shoppers choose to engage with, whether it's online, offline, in-app, click and collect, or a combination of all. And then just to build on this, there's even more recent data that came out from the US Commerce Department in July showing much of the same. And some of the key takeaways from the US Commerce report was that with many stores reopening, e-commerce pandemic fuel rise that took place, particularly in April, was starting to ebb. So while consumers' habits have absolutely changed and e-commerce has leapt forward years, if not decades, it doesn't appear that online retail will necessarily dominate or decimate physical retail. Therefore, it's important for you to consider your entire portfolio when determining your strategy on a forward-looking basis. So anecdotally, I speak with a fair number of multi-channel retailers, and some of the points that I've been hearing fairly consistently is those who were aggressive during the pandemic in their marketing investment and pushing consumers into e-commerce saw really big gains, and many of the public companies are showing and supporting those points. There are winners in this pandemic, and by proxy, those are the clients or the businesses that were taking advantage of opportunities. And if you follow the trend from the consumer data from the Commerce Department, there is likely to be opportunity that's present here in this holiday season for those consumers that are either much more willing to go into physical store or open to the opportunity, as long as you're addressing those core tenets that Drew referenced of cheap, close, and safe. So if we move on to the next slide, this is getting a little bit more into Criteo's data. So just as a point of reference, Criteo has nearly 200 retailers onboarding SKU level transaction data from their offline ecosystem. And this chart is showing a breakdown of our US retailers. So this includes a diverse set of multi-channel retailers and their in-store sales activity versus their online sales activity. So this includes retailers who are required retailers who were open throughout the pandemic, and some that were only able to open as local governments and safety precautions were put into place. So the takeaway here is that consumers certainly picked up their online shopping habits, but the trend is starting to normalize back to some of the pre-COVID norms. So lockdowns increased time spent online and created many more moments for discovery. Another data point related to this is that consumers are buying from new retailers more and more now during the pandemic. In fact, nearly 50% of consumers have tried a new retailer that they hadn't ever purchased from before. So in developing engagement strategies with those consumers will be highly valuable. Furthermore, consumers turn to online shopping to buy traditional essentials such as groceries and cleaning supplies. And then new essentials have started to come to fruition, such as entertainment and exercise equipment, which could only be purchased online. So what many of our customers look to do, as if they were multi-channel retailers and they were following that blue line there, and we looked into the real decline in their business, was how do we develop re-engagement strategies of our physical retail buyers so that we don't lose those customers to competitors and lose share of wallet, and how do we bring those consumers online, even if their traditional preferences were to purchase in store. So these were some of the things that many of our partners needed, and I bet many of you in the audience were experiencing. So if we move on to the next slide, Drew, now that we've looked at kind of the big picture and then some of the physical retail experiences on a bit of a smaller scale via Criteo's data, we wanted to dig even a level deeper into some category level data. So Drew earlier talked about foot traffic to Best Buy specifically. So we thought we'd show you some of our electronics insights across Criteo's retail base of electronics retailers. So let's dig in a little bit more. As you can see here, consumer electronics have been above its pre-COVID norms for nearly the entire pandemic, with the exception of July, which coincides with, at least in my experience, summer vacation, and then as Drew referenced, some of that summer slump. And as you can see, a few categories though, such as speakers, headphones, video, etc., the lockdown pushed Americans who now needed to work from home to go out and buy essentials that they needed for their home office. So as we looked at two main gradual increases here, one right after the lockdown and one that came around in that back to school experience. So combining this sales data with some of the COVID location data gives you a better understanding of how consumers were acting and interacting with multi-channel retailers.
Yeah, and one of the fascinating points here is that if you take Best Buy as an example, Best Buy traffic was very low, as we saw during that March, April, and May period. And so a lot of this was online order or click and collect, highlighting how well this kind of foot traffic and Criteo data works together. But they had a great back to school period during this period in the August and July period, when we do see this kind of spike upwards corresponding with the usual back to school period. Whereas Walmart and Target fell behind their normal back to school pace, Best Buy was able to keep it up. And so this again supports the notion, which is consumers will go to online, but they are more than happy to return back to the physical retailers when the environment fits. And so we're seeing that diversification return.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we looked at some of the gainers within categories in the electronics category. But another thing to look at is maybe some of the decliners or those that are not quite as successful. So let's look at computers and laptops. So unlike the previous slide, there's really only one spike post-COVID. This is obviously because the lifetime of a computer is significantly longer, but also that you needed to buy one to address family needs, or such as in my household, we bought a computer for our third grader who now needed to learn from home and needed that computer to join calls with his teacher. So this likely led to that pop as households, schools, and others bought laptops and computers. But now you look at the more recent period on the right-hand side of the chart, there aren't many laptops and computers being sold. Well, why is that? Well, first, again, the life cycle of a laptop is far longer. But second, some of the inexpensive computers that you may want to buy for a child who's going to school were not available, and therefore retailers couldn't serve students as well during that time frame. I don't know if anyone tried to get an inexpensive computer in the back to school period, but frankly, inexpensive computers were not likely to be available. So this doesn't mean that the demand wasn't there so much as the supply wasn't available. So this is something to take into account as you develop your supply chain strategy, and how does the supply chain impact your businesses. So as probably most of you are marketers in this audience, there is a lesson here as well. So you want to ensure the efficiency of your marketing and personalization strategies. You don't want to waste marketing dollars on products that aren't available. One way to do this is to ensure your feeds prioritize in-stock items and especially for multi-channel retailers, where, as Drew mentioned, consumers are much more willing to go back into store. You got to ensure that your local inventory is included as well. You don't want to be recommending a laptop in Bucktown here in Chicago that isn't available at your local Best Buy or local retailer. So you need to enable product recommendation based upon what is available for you in stores as well as online. So as we move on to the next slide, we've overlaid, back one there, Drew, we've overlaid the PlaceIQ quarantine routine and reemergence ramp and summer slump on top of that data. And it kind of coincides with what Drew was referencing on foot traffic. So moving on to dig in a little bit further. So, sometimes looking back will help us to predict the future. So let's take a look back at 2019 for a moment. We just got done talking about the laptop activity in COVID, but what's interesting is that laptops and computers during last holiday season were also not a popular item. Rather, it's computer accessories like computer covers, speakers, cables, etc., that were strong sellers in the holiday season. Maybe that's because there are gift givers who are not really willing to plunk down $1,000 for a nice computer as a gift, and some of those accessories might be more appropriate as a gift. But at the same time, with a spike in summer sales for computers and laptops in 2020, I think it's safe to assume that the same story as we're seeing here from 2019 is likely to repeat itself again this holiday season. So again, looking at 2019 holiday season for electronic sales, we observed that we're going to likely observe a spike around the Black Friday, Cyber Monday type of period, all the way through the end of December. But as we prepare for 2020, with retailers starting deals and promotions even sooner, we can expect that this month-long peak may double into early November. Moving on to the next slide, I think this might imply some of the impact from Prime Day. So let's take a look at this in some more detail. We have heard rumors that Amazon Prime Day will be a little, well, obviously later than it had been previously, but early in our holiday season, with it potentially happening in October. So what we found is that Prime Day creates a real retail halo effect, giving all retailers the opportunity to capitalize upon traffic and consumers. If it takes place in October, as it sounds like it may, there may be a new Cyber Monday, Black Friday peak related to Prime Day in October. If we have that early peak followed by the standard peak later in the season, we all need to start to get some rest right now, because we're in for a long holiday season. But in all seriousness, further extending the 2020 holiday season could be good for all of us. And let's remember, as Drew referenced in all of his slides, consumers are not traveling. They're not spending on entertainment. And as they historically have done all of that, there may be pent-up demand. So you may want to plan accordingly, as consumers have larger piggy banks here as they go into Q4. They've missed their families and therefore may want to give bigger and better gifts this holiday season, etc. So digging more into the details here on the slide, Prime Day has the potential to benefit lots of retail categories. For example, in 2019, fashion and luxury were up 41% during the same Prime period. Mass merchants saw a 48% increase in sales, and sporting goods, who's been one of the big benefactors here in the COVID experience, were up 58%. So while add to basket numbers were consistent over the sales period, many shoppers wait until the last minute, possibly because they're doing research and/or comparison shopping, as we've taught them by all having very similar sales periods. So a lot of opportunity there for engagement of your consumer base based upon intent signals that are going on your website and in your physical retail outlets as well. Moving to the next slide. There's a few key takeaways here from the Criteo data that every retailer should consider. The first being start early. So consideration for holiday purchases start early this year. Criteo data in Q4 2019 shows that buyers have a nice printer there going on in the background. My apologies. My son's homework getting printed out. But consideration for holiday purchases will start early. Criteo data from Q4 2019 shows that buyers who shopped for the first time from a retailer during Black Friday weekend made their first online visit, regardless of browsing environment, 41 days prior to the purchase. That's 6 weeks of holiday shopping activity for a consumer to search, evaluate, and investigate Black Friday purchases. Creating touch points early in the holiday season is critical, even if they don't seem to pay off right away. Criteo data shows that in 2019, retail traffic was already up 46% in the 10 days prior to Black Friday. This should play a real role in your promotional calendar and pricing strategy. Key point, re-engagement strategy, and drive that holiday historical shopper back to your stores. Moving on, the second key takeaway is to plan for the omni shopper. Today's consumers are bouncing between various different devices, websites, media, social platforms, and apps, and we're calling this the Black Friday bounce. 40% of new Black Friday weekend buyers made their first purchase from a different browsing environment than the one they first visited. Before the transaction on Black Friday weekend in 2019, retailer properties were browsed on an average of 2 different browsing environments, and this means that many consumers don't actually buy from the same device that they started shopping on. Furthermore, Criteo data also shows that mobile and stores are tightly connected. In some of our data, more than 59% of matched in-store transactions, meaning consumers that we understood previous to their purchase in-store, had a mobile touch point, which means that the majority of in-store buyers actually started shopping on their smartphone. All of this data tells us that the nonlinear path to purchase is the norm for Black Friday, and it is crucial to connect the dots across every touch point. So if we move on to the next slide, in early summer, we asked consumers to get an understanding of how they would feel in shopping in the holiday season. And similar to the survey response at the beginning of this discussion, similar to some of the points that Drew made in his presentation points, 88% said they plan to continue purchasing gifts online and sending them to recipients. 64% that they will miss going to physical stores. So even as you see in Drew's data that malls are coming back, dollar stores are succeeding, big box and pharmacies are also succeeding. Consumers want to go have that physical experience, touch and feel their products before they purchase, as they always have. And 65% that said that they would be comfortable shopping in malls in mid-October, meaning that Black Friday for most US consumers may be ready to shop in stores. So in that sense, people miss the stores and plan to do so again here in the holiday season. So the key takeaway is if you're an omnichannel retailer, do not discount your historical in-store shopper. They may still want to buy in store, so consider advertising to them and let them know which stores of yours are open and where those stores are open, their hours, and of course, keep them aware of your safety protocols to ensure that you can keep them loyal and buying throughout the season, either online, in store, or through curbside pickup or other solutions that have been important. So that's a good transition into the next slide. So like mentioned earlier, click and collect curbside pickup is an emerging trend already this year, and potentially maybe even the golden ticket for the holiday season as well. So throughout COVID, click and collect or buy online pickup in store functionalities have experienced a 33% increase in the numbers of households using this service. And in fact, it has gained more first-time buyers through the pandemic than in the pre-pandemic period. These shoppers aren't going anywhere, guys. When looking at the existing users, 50% reported that they were extremely likely to continue using click and collect. 24% of new users reported that they were extremely likely to continue using click and collect in the future. And when it comes to retailer sales driven by click and collect, the numbers are extremely impressive. Not only are sales up, but so are basket sizes and frequency. All of this, along with the innovation and consumer trends, is simply good news for retailers with physical store locations. So if we think about, what Drew said earlier related to Best Buy, the second that stores were open, you might need to pivot your marketing strategy to message to your consumers, loyal or otherwise, to pivot into store shopping opportunities and personalize the creative accordingly. So one of the things, again, that's key here, and that was mentioned very significantly at Shop Talk, was that this is deemed the biggest innovation in multi-channel retailer. And given that click and collect is continuing to grow, it is likely a top priority for marketers during the holiday season. And it's important to ensure that you're treating your end consumer with a personalized experience that shows the inventory that's available in your local store and recommending it in your messaging. So as we come to a conclusion, this is a key element of what we're talking about here as it relates to personalizing that experience. So for those consumers who have a propensity to buy online, let's focus on a message that has them buying online. If they are a buy online, pick up in store or BOPUS or curbside customer, message them accordingly. And furthermore, if consumers prefer in-store purchases, as many of you do, let's focus on that in your messaging. So with that, we've officially reached the point in the session that you've eagerly been waiting for, and that's our recommendation. So Drew, you want to kick it off?
Sure, thanks, Tim. So one of our big takeaways, as Tim just kind of put there, is that we have seen an increase in the assortment of ways that people can buy, both online, click and collect, and in store. And we have seen that there has been uptake, a more even distribution of how people are picking up those different options, as you could see with the Best Buy chart. We expect that distribution to continue through the holiday season. This poses a problem for marketers, which is who should I market what to? You know, if there is an array of ways to get people to buy, what am I going to do about that? Well, thankfully, we at Place IQ have actually built some audiences that can solve exactly this problem. This actually came out of our work in the dining sector, but it's incredibly relevant to the problem that we've identified here. So at Place IQ, we see people visiting stores, and we can also see what households they live in. And we can use both of those data elements to basically segment devices by out-of-home activity. That enables us to compare to pre-COVID norms and build audiences that are either strictly isolating, cautiously reemerging, or fully reemerged. Now, using these segments, you can deliver different messages to different people based on their dispensation to leave the house. So if you're talking to dealerships and you're trying to address a market that isn't willing to come in for a test drive, direct them to your online experiences, for example. If you're a fast food vendor and you're talking to people with medium activity, they're willing to go out and do stuff, but they would prefer to take less risk if they can. Talk to them about that kind of click and collect option, order online or delivery in store. And then if you really are trying to get that physical traffic, which we know people want based on the fact that once it turns on, talk to the high active people, the reemerged people, and that's the people you should be asking to come into the store. You shouldn't be asking people who want to stay home to come into the store. You're going to waste a lot of media that way. In addition to that, we offer other audiences that are tailored to kind of the adjustments in COVID life. So rather than trying to get people to drive far away to venues, you can target just the ones that live around the places you're asking them to go, because we know they're driving less. We can target people who have lapsed, that basically they did these things prior to COVID and now we haven't seen evidence that they've done that since, to try to get them back in store or communicate new offers or services that may be more attuned to the risks they're willing to take. Finally, what's not on this slide, but I'm happy to talk about today, I literally just confirmed it over this weekend, we're actually going to be launching audiences that are geared towards the pickup shopper, the click and collect shopper. We can identify people who only spend very little time at retailers. So we can basically say, hey, I keep seeing this person visit, Target, but they're only there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That to us indicates that they are there for a click and collect shopper. That allows us to segment these guys. Similarly, we can take long durations and find the people who are willing to go in, browse, and start to use those in addition to our reemergent audiences to build some nice stuff. There's two ways that people use these audiences, our reemergent audiences. They either use it to limit who they market to drive more efficient media. Say you're a retailer that requires people to come in the store, you don't want to talk to the people who are strictly isolating. But if you're a retailer who has many options, as Tim has pointed out, is going to be the trend who has click and collect, has order at home, or fully reemerge that are going to be in store. Tailor your messaging and your call to action based on the risks they are willing to take. We're going to see this diversity continue, and the retailers that meet these customers where they want to be met are going to be the ones that are going to be successful and most efficient during this holiday season. So with that, I hand it over to Tim.
Great, thanks, Drew. So just to recap, a few things to keep in mind as you go about your holiday planning. Let's start earlier than usual. That Amazon Prime halo effect may come into play here in October. You've got to understand your shopper's persona and their comfort levels and communicate to them accordingly. Build localized marketing strategies. Obviously, PlaceIQ's got a lot of really good ideas that they've shared here that can be incorporated into your marketing plan. And then furthermore, plan for the omni shopper. 59% of consumers who buy online, buy in store, have mobile touch points post the in-store visit. Browsing online and in mobile is happening before the in-store purchase. And then finally, optimizing in real time, relying on a data-driven consumer trend and track those programs and those campaigns accordingly is going to be very important. And then combining online and offline data to maximize your customer lifetime value, as well as understand who your prospects are so that you can conduct true new customer acquisition programs is going to be very important. And then optimizing those audience strategies based upon their consumer priorities. And then finally, of course, lean into some of the partners that are certainly impactful and define and scale holiday strategies with those partners. So we are at the top of the hour. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have enough time for taking the questions and answering the questions. But with that said, I promised a winner to our raffle. And I want to alert Danielle Brandon from Lowe's that you are our winner. Congratulations. And on behalf of Drew and PlaceIQ and Criteo, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We'll have more of this detail available to you as a follow-up. Those reemergence audiences are available to you from PlaceIQ, and all of this data is readily available for you to consume as we move forward. So thanks so much to everyone for sticking with us, and really appreciate the time, and thank you for participating in our holiday sessions.
Thanks everyone, and happy holidays.
Cheers.